All right, so now recording is in progress. Welcome everybody. I will go ahead and get this shared on the screen. Okay, so again, welcome everybody. Thank you for bearing with us. We do have about a 30-minute presentation plan tonight that will be followed by a Q&A discussion session. So we'd ask that everybody hold their questions till the end of the presentation, or you're also welcome to type them into the Q&A chat feature at the bottom of the screen. And as I mentioned, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be posted to the city website following the meeting, so you're always welcome to go back and view anything that you might have missed or one more detail on. And then, of course, anybody who wasn't able to attend will be able to watch as well. So go ahead and jump into the first slide here. We do have our team of consultants are all joining us tonight. So this presentation will primarily be between us, Tuck-Hinton. And so Mary and I will be doing a decent portion of the presentation tonight, but also Ed Henley with Pillars Development will be talking a lot related to the market assessment and comparables and benchmarking. And then Carolyn Tate will also be talking to some of the interpretive recommendations as well. Like I said, the balance of our consulting team is also available to be able to answer specific questions to their scope at the end of the presentation during Q&A. So just setting some context for the meeting, in case you haven't participated yet, there have been two prior town halls, and it's just as a part of the public engagement portion of the master plan. But when when this process was started, the city had outlined some initial goals for the master plan. Just run through those real quick. That would serve as a guide for the development and improvements on the property. That would facilitate historic interpretation of the sites. It would provide for a safe and enjoyable visitor experience, and most importantly, that it would protect and preserve the historic significance and resources of the site. And then, furthermore, just the overall purpose of the master plan in terms of what's being delivered at the end of this is a set of guidelines and drawings that are going to identify the goals and objectives for the physical development of the site. We'll be providing an estimate of probable costs for those improvements, and then also identifying the funding strategies for the implementation of those recommendations. And then, again, just going back and providing just a little recap of what we've done to date, kind of where we've been, and where we're going as we're kind of wrapping up the process. We've obviously kind of taken some pivots and pauses along the way with all the current events between the city and Ripavilla. But the process has continued, and the steps that are required for us to reach our recommendations are generally unchanged. And so that's involved a number of site visits, a lot of research into the history of the property and comparables. We generated a number of analysis drawings related to the site and history, conducted interviews, have hosted 2 other prior town halls, which are also posted on the city's website, recordings of those and the slides. We've distributed surveys, solicited feedback, and have generally reported on those results. And then the larger focus of tonight is going to be the market analysis, benchmarking, updates and recommendations, and then also an overview of evaluation costs associated with these recommendations. And then we also listed the priorities here, which I won't go through in a whole lot of detail. Go ahead and get started with a lot of the meat of the presentation, but these are all items that we've tried to keep in mind throughout the process of what we're trying to prioritize and elevate as most important in this master plan process. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn the floor over, the virtual floor over to Mr. Edward Henley with Pillars Development to go through a lot of his market research and recommendations that have come out of that.
Great, making sure I'm unmuted and everybody can hear me. All right, great. Well, Josh, thank you for that. And I believe, the things you covered lead well into this slide. I'm going to give a little bit of context of the market assessment process that we went through, mostly in a complete totality as a team, but very much informed by the public meetings that we've had, the survey data that have come in. So just wanted to make sure that all that are listening know that this assessment is impacted and takes into account the real-time feedback that we got. And then of course, the work we've done behind the scenes. Just really quick to touch on each one of these bullet points, just to put context into what we mean by a market assessment. The assessment piece of that is really related to information and data gathering. So we're gathering different types of context, different demographics, comparative institutions, and really looking at operations, the totality of the environment that makes up what these institutions operate within, and how they, of course, play a role in the who, what, when, where, and why of an organization's mission, and also how they deliver that. The benchmarking is much more for the purposes of this master plan, a focus on visioning rather than current conditions. We were challenged to really look at what the future of Ripavilla could be. And so our goal was to take into account best practices that we saw from others. And then that comparative analysis is really looking to identify possible and at least very likely areas of growth that would align with Ripavilla's mission, as well as that have been successful for others and we think can be replicated. And then finally, our recommendations are broken into really 3 large groups, and we'll touch on those later, but operations, expanded program offerings, and then capital improvements. And as Josh said, we'll touch on the capital improvements also with an overview of their cost. Next slide, please. So we are, one of the things that I think is very easy to do is most of our team has went and visited Ripavilla during its operations, is to contemplate how Ripavilla operates as opposed to others. What you're seeing is a representation more generally, not particular to those compared institutions that we've done for the market assessment. Most generally, just to look at when most institutions and attractions that are either historically significant locations, estates that operate and really have the same functions that Ripavilla has served, where there's tours given, there's events held, and then of course there's the opportunity for educational services. And what you see is a pretty significant trend that Fridays and Saturdays are usually the highest attendance days, as well as the days for the most revenue. That's typically followed by Sunday. And the reason that is they provide for longer durations of visits. So while the attendance may not be as high, there is definitely more revenue, usually for food and beverage of some sort, or special events, or unique events and opportunities. And then, of course, as weddings are become more prominent at facilities like those that are Ripavilla, and the demand for weddings spills over onto Sundays. And so they have really a greater return per capita on the folks that they see on a Sunday. But I think it's also important to really highlight what happens during the week. There are days that all of these institutions are there, right? They're not going anywhere. And some have really found a way to maximize utilizing those days during the week, often for corporate events, for hosting and supporting research endeavors, and then just usual business operations, preparation for events, definitely turning over exhibits, and then again, hosting any type of special events that are related to the research area. So very much institutionally tied to universities, research studies. And then one thing that was pretty creative that we did find is that a lot of them are used for filming. So when you think about spaces that are trying to be historically accurate in a certain context, definitely with caution, opening those up to some filmmakers. So again, just utilizing the entire spread of days that are there. And of course, there's some small expenses that come with that, but each can be done in proportion to what's offered. I will take that into account as we talk about different forms of revenue. I think we did want to emphasize on the key area of revenue for Ripavilla, which has been one, it's most utilitarian, right? So any and everyone, and that's been tours and admissions for tours. Over the past 3 years, or I should say over the past 4 years, but of course we did not utilize 2020. It was a unique year, not really one that was feasible for evaluation. Over the past 3 fiscal years, there was a range really around the $49,000 all the way up to the $60,000 mark. And what you'll see is an escalation, which is positive. You wanted to see that escalation over those past 3 years. But when evaluating those admission prices, what we found is by comparison, they're fairly low in terms of what others are charging for admissions into similar facilities. And there are some varying reasons why, but with that being found, I think there's an opportunity for a price increase. But with that being said, usually that comes with greater offerings, right? And a clear statement and objective that's a commitment to improvement. So you don't want to just raise prices with no commitment and obligation to that price coming with a greater experience. And so on this slide, you'll see a comparison that really shows 3 different models, essentially a pricing study that we conducted. And this builds off of what you saw on the last slide. So at the very bottom, just to orient you, you'll see 2017, 2018, and 2019. Those are what projected revenues could have been if the above pricing study was in place in those fiscal years. So a simple price increase, which is the one in the farthest left-hand side, is just saying, here's what our current pricing is, a small percentage increase that will put Ripavilla on par with others that are in the mid-state area. And that would be roughly a 25% increase across the board. Again, remaining with children access being free. Very simple, very clean, very simple, very clean, but just a slight pricing increase. And then there is a pricing model that quite a few other sites use, and that's what I'll call the premium or separate offering, where there are the typical tour costs. So that's just the main structure, the main site, or the main attraction at that time. And then you have an additional or additive price as a premium for the entire grounds or some other special offering or unique offering, even if that's just one extra exhibit, if it's done on a seasonal basis, or access to a special presenter or someone who might just add a further interactive type of feel to a tour. And with that being said, that's represented by the middle column. And so you'll have no adjustment to the base pricing, but then you do have that additive price. Again, what that does and represents is roughly a price increase of about 35%. The thing to note here is that is an optional price. So the model below it shows that basically everyone loves what you're adding, right? And so you have a very good return on investment for that added service. But you do see an increase year over year. And basically in 2019, there would have been an increase of roughly $16,000, give or take, in both of those models. If you go to the very far right, you'll see what's a combination or a hybrid. And this addresses the short, or I guess just say the deficit or the variance of the current pricing. So you do have the pricing increase, but you also take upon yourself to do the premium or separate offering model. That has a pretty significant adjustment to price, and of course income related to doing so, in the roughly 60% range. This is assuming that again, the attendance would have been the same as it would have been in previous years. You see in 2019, roughly that the income could have been nearly $90,000, which would have been roughly a 50% increase. So again, several different studies, several different options, ones to be contemplated. But I think with some increase in programming, there's some definite return on investment that can be shown, and just some strategic opportunities there with the pricing of tours. So we've again dove heavily into what could happen at Ripavilla, and I think want to orient everyone on with this slide. It is recommended revenue diversity, and so that means, for lack of a better way to put it, very different ways of bringing in dollars, and doing so in a way that is representative of how other varying and successful institutions continue to keep themselves in the black, right? So they operate traditionally at a very small deficit, or at where they're breaking even or above. And so on the left-hand side, what you will see are more active revenue sources. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see what are considered passive revenue sources. Now, I always like to say at some point in time, all revenue is active. Some action had to be taken. But if you were to categorize them this way, a passive revenue source is one that is pretty much inked and done, and you don't have to pursue it or renew it or commit ample resources to it on an annual or recurring basis. It's secured and it somewhat fulfills itself. With that being said, here you'll see the importance of the tours and admission are still a large part of any organization that's in the same sphere as Ripavilla, making up a large portion of their revenue. And again, rounding that out and making up over 50% of their revenue are the events and rentals. So really keying in on those two areas as where you want to make a lot of your revenue. It just seems to be the greatest level of service, and also the greatest return comes in from a revenue standpoint. But there's another mix of options that aren't necessarily representative, at least not represented highly in Ripavilla's past financial history, and that's memberships and grants. Unfortunately, reviewing financials for Ripavilla, grants weren't something that appeared a lot, and that's greatly missed as an opportunity, because there's so many institutions that have grants for really supporting, creating programs, initiatives, as well as staff to perpetuate those initiatives. And so really something that needs to be focused on. And memberships, while they're offered, they aren't at the same rate or level, don't make up as much of the revenue stream at Ripavilla as they do in other areas. And then back over into the passive side, I think it's really important to highlight that there's a certain portion of dollars that every institution tries to bring in a passive way. And in making that so, it really creates sustainability for the organization. At the bottom of that circle, you see carved out in gray the endowment piece. It's a great stability and anchor for institutions to really have those key dollars every year, whether they need them for emergencies or whether they need them just to perform their base services. The other areas that really make or break institutions are other support. And what I mean by those, we've highlighted just a few of those. In this case, the city of Spring Hill has been one of those areas of other support for Ripavilla, but also thinking outside of that, in-kind services, strategically working with other institutions. One that I found and I think is very much a great opportunity for Ripavilla is working with universities. That can be supporting staff, providing other in-kind services around use of equipment, again, providing additional items, additional areas of expertise as it relates to things external of the mansion. When we talk about agriculture and really activating the site itself, and then just in general partnerships, whether that's done with co-advertising for events, people that are just dedicating to use Ripavilla as a space for hosting events. All of those things come in and really help bolster that revenue stream on an annual basis. On the next slide, in the inverse of revenue, of course, it's expenses, right? So money comes in, but in order to do that, money must go out. On this one, I would say, instead of the active and passive, what I would say, on the left-hand side in the larger circle, you have the adaptive or responsive expenses. And then on the right-hand side, you have kind of the core base expenses that you would have no matter how vibrant or how dormant the facilities and the site may be. And when you have an older facility, typically there's a substantial amount of maintenance that goes into that facility. If you have incurred or taken on any type of debt in terms of servicing the facility, really bringing things up to date and making them more and more adaptable to modern times. One big expense that we found that was recurring in a lot of the comparables were data and telecommunications, right? So trying to become more AV compatible for different events, and then also auditory for learning opportunities. And then just base services. I mean, you'll have to file taxes, you'll have to pay your accountants. And there's a few other things that you just have to do just to be open and operational. You'll have essential and core staff. And so really saying, as a matter of how we rank or moderate what we consider success, is getting the greatest return on investment of those core dollars. And the way you do that is you look to the left-hand side in the larger circle, and you work to build out programs, expand and have more events. You do different things that will then allow you will justify, for lack of a better term, greater staff. So you'll need more staff to support. And additional staff does not mean must be hired. I want to make sure I'm explicit with that. Additional staff can be volunteers. It can be a product of those other partnerships. And again, depending on the nature of the programming, it can be university professors, that may be historians, that may be horticulturists. So there's a great opportunity there. But as you start to utilize and facilitate more events, you will have an increase in utilities. Sometimes there is more administrative costs. Insurance may go up. For every event that you host, there will be some more demand. And then again, more marketing and fundraising dollars can and will be spent and should be spent in that area. And then more use does oftentimes need more maintenance, especially when you talk about the grounds. So just wanted to show there's a correlation there, but a lot of institutions use that base and core expenses every year as a baseline for saying that they will be successful. Move on. So I keep referencing others, and I keep saying other institutions. Really want to highlight what other institutions are doing. And we'll touch on those that we actually used as comparable institutions and for reference for our market assessment, really in a few key areas. Amenities and activating the space. Ripavilla's site is fantastic, nearly 100 acres, but a lot of it does remain dormant. And what I found is that a lot of other institutions are activating their space more and more. And in a year where we experienced the requirement and the mandate to social distance, there's been even more appreciation for those spaces activated externally of buildings. Embracing the history of slavery. Again, the year 2020 brought a lot of social justice initiatives to light, a lot of attention in that area. But there are a lot of institutions that have been embracing slavery long before then, have done a fantastic job, and have some models that are worth either looking at, studying, if not full on replicating at Ripavilla. And then again, just what the mission typically is, and that's connecting the past to the present. There's some very creative ways of doing so, but understanding that there's a lot of capital that's going into that, making things more interactive, being more diverse in your offerings, and really communicating and making it approachable, making your site approachable and welcoming to a very diverse group. And then beyond the history, I won't read all those off, but it's just saying activating the site in a way that's atypical from a history lesson that you may usually get, but looking outside the box there. And then capital campaigns as really a way to facilitate all of those things through the physical and built environment, raising dollars to do so. So what's in front of you, the top half at least, are images and bullet points that you've seen before. So I won't highlight them too much. I won't read them off, but just kind of, if you look to, left, middle, and right again, a little bit of a broken record there, but I think it's very, very good visually. I want to call out both Magnolia Plantation and Evergreen Plantation. And the reason I've done things this way is to show you that there is a wide spectrum of how institutions, specifically those in the space of historical preservation and at the intersection of events, tours, and education, are really leveraging their natural real assets to be sustainable. So Magnolia Plantation, for instance, has very robust programming. They have nearly 400 acres. And for lack of a better way to describe it, it's almost an amusement park. They have just about any and everything you can imagine, from a petting zoo. They have gondola and boat rides, but they do also have, 18th and 19th century structures that they've worked to preserve, as well as renovate and then replicate with some models to give historical recounts of what things were like at that time. And then you have, in juxtaposition to that, Evergreen Plantation, which is much more stoic. It is definitely committed to the snapshot moment in time of what life was like on a plantation in the pre-Civil War and antebellum eras. They actually still have a functioning plantation that is operational. They did close during COVID, but they did operate still as a plantation. They actually do have housing on the site that supports their plantation. But they also have an extreme commitment to preserving the history and telling the stories of times of slavery and the transition out of that era with the Ancestor Project, which I think is done very well, has been very well received by the community. And I believe Carolyn may speak a little bit more about them later. I want to touch on kind of the middle category now. And again, kind of just bouncing along the entire spectrum. You have Oak Alley Plantation, as well as Bellmead Plantation, located in Middle Tennessee. Both of those are comparable in size, roughly 28 to 30 acres. Both of them have an extreme focus on beautification, highlighting their beautiful mansions that are the cornerstones of those plantations. But also, they both started to adjust over the past 15 to 20 years to incorporating the story of slavery, really telling that story and highlighting their collections and making those a part of that storytelling, telling the story of the families, but as well as those who served and were indentured on the sites. And I think that really shows you that it doesn't matter how big or how small you are, there is a way that you can approach this and become a very sustainable institution. And then finally, I'll move to the far right, where I think it's very important to talk about those that I'll say kind of are in the middle of the road. But Cheekwood, which is also in Middle Tennessee, 55 acres, very much focused on preserving their mansion, but using it much more as a backdrop to their very, very heavily programmed landscape and estate grounds. Highlighting both Cheekwood as well as Drayton Hall for their capital campaigns. Both have done a great job raising funds over the past decade or so to really continue to bolster their grounds while preserving their core mansion assets. We would go to the next slide, Paige. Or Josh. So one thing I wanted to highlight, I mentioned Cheekwood, and I think it's really important to highlight what they've done to the estate grounds, heavily programmed. And the reason I wanted to highlight it is because it gives you, we talk about a diversity of funding. We talk about an area that makes you much more attractive to different types of events. And it, by any stretch of the imagination, Cheekwood has expressed and shown their versatility this past year. As we have all collectively been impacted in some way, form, or fashion by the pandemic. Cheekwood was able to reopen in May, right? So most places closed back into February, sometime in March. They were able to reopen in May and still were able to have a fairly successful outdoor programming calendar year, right? Seasonally. They had very good attendance for a lot of their outdoor events that happened on a recurring basis. And a lot of people were eager to support them as well, because they know most institutions were having a very tough time. But again, just some great visuals here of the different areas on their site that were open and active to the public. Just wanted to highlight that there as we talk about activation and beautification. Those 98 acres have a lot of opportunity in them. The other thing that others are doing that really create that activity that we're suggesting and recommending as a team are dedicated spaces or updated spaces for learning and for teaching. Really, those are the core purposes that a lot of these spaces are created. And then what happens is they're designed through the lens of being able to host events. I won't read all the bullet points here, but really and truly just a few things. They really create a great impact, right, on the amount of returning patrons. When you give people the opportunity for a space to be activated over and over again, it doesn't get old, right? There's not that I've seen it before. You're programming a reason for them to come back. And then again, the educational experience is much more marketable. And that's for all ages, whether you're serving school ages all the way up into, like I said, research level, collegiate students. It does allow a lot of diversity in what you're able to offer. And then again, we talked about children. Areas specifically activated for children really makes a main draw for families. It allows a family to come again to a place over and over again, especially if children love it. But again, the educational experience is much more marketable to all age groups. So there's definitely that versatility there. And the way to capitalize on that return patronage and those longer stays are with food service. One, there, of course, an additional source of revenue. But one thing that we found from articles, mostly those of parks and theme parks, but there are two reasons that people leave areas that have great outdoor spaces for after a short period of time. One of those is lack of food, right? So you're hungry, you're thirsty, there's not enough refreshments, or they don't have bathrooms or the bathrooms aren't clean enough, right? And so when you think about food service, so joining that into a space where you have restroom facilities, you're really eliminating the reasons for people to leave. And so you're creating something where people can spend all day leisurely and will feel comfortable returning over and over again. So Drayton Hall, this beautiful jewel located in Charleston, South Carolina, I think is what I myself, Brittany on my team, and what I hope I've started to impart upon our entire master plan team is what I would say is about as close of a spot on comparison for what I think our visioning, especially on a step-by-step process for what Ripavilla can do and should especially benchmark themselves after and monitor themselves against. So Drayton Hall is 125 acres. They are located on a river in Charleston, South Carolina. But what I wanted to show from the area on the left is that they have their mansion essentially sitting on an island. There were a lot of historical structures that surrounded the mansion, but they've since been removed. But the home itself remains, is preserved, and hosts tours very similar to what happens at Ripavilla today and has been over the past few years. And to the right-hand side, really quickly, I'll show where the pin is of course the mansion that you see on the left-hand side. But to plan south, what you'll see is sort of a compound of service facilities that have been used for storing artifacts, that have been used for hosting some events, that's heavily used for parking. And there's a red roofed shelter there that is I believe a 19th century. It was a caretaker's quarters that was renovated and repurposed, and is really the core location where they have introduced the concept again of what life was like for a slave or someone who was acting as a servant during the times when the mansion was in its heyday. So if you go to the next slide, I decided to really show the importance of a vision. I think it's something that really resonated with me. And that's what we're hoping to provide as a team for Ripavilla. So that compound that we showed and that was highlighted on the last slide, you'll see more close-up photos on the future slides, but it's really a reimagining of what that space can be, not to change the dynamics of the site. I think they found that it was actually quite prominent, and they really liked the picturesqueness of the mansion, and they also wanted to preserve the area around it for archaeological studies. There's great papers and research on that as well. But the compound, which had already been disturbed and was already used for a lot of purposes, it was reimagined, and they worked to really create that to serve the needs of Drayton Hall into the future. So if you'll click for me, please. So this is a little walk. We'll meander a little bit, so to speak, over through that compound. And so you'll see the parking there. So you notice there were no parking lots or anything near the home. So all the parking that was supporting the facility was off to the compound, even further off of the Google map that we had shown. But one thing I'm highlighting in the far back is that caretaker's home that was repurposed. And then on the right-hand side, you will see fairly prominently that red home. And then you'll also see a large tree that has a bit of a dedication plaque to it. You will understand why I'm highlighting these things as we go to the next slide. So when you think about what was done for the vision, there was a goal of preservation as well as a goal of storytelling and transition into the future. And so again, when we talk about a vision, that vision was taken and moved into action. And so here is the first phase of what that vision project looked like at Drayton Hall. And so you'll see my arrow still remaining there. That red roof is that same home. You'll see the one tree that's there in the center was preserved. And then off to the right, you'll see the compounds. This was done in a phasing manner because of course they wanted to continue operations and dedicated space to growth. On the next slides, I think it's really important to talk about what their vision was. And particularly when our team is talking and we say an interpretation or a visitor center, what does that mean, right? What types of things would that be used for? And how is that interacting with the site itself, and what services is it providing? And so there's a collection of images here. One kind of an area that shows how it's situated on the site relative to the mansion in the far top. The activation of the outdoor space, and then the internal spaces for exhibits, as well as a learning and classroom space, really to orient visitors to the site, patrons of the site, with the entire history of the site itself, as well as any type of movements and artifacts that could be prominent there, but preserves the house from that type of foot traffic that you may want, and also not having to retrofit an historic structure for things that can be done elsewhere. And again, dual purpose to serve events. And again, when you beautify the site, you invite people to extend their stay and experience the entire campus itself. So this happened in April of 2018 when Drayton Hall's Visitor Center was open. So just somewhat of a timeline, just to give an overview of how things happened. So the snapshots that I took and showed you previously were all from 2013. Those were all from Google Earth. And then you have 2015 and 2016, which is where 2015 is where the visioning process was happening. A capital campaign had started. And then 2016 was when they broke ground. And the photo you're seeing there is much later into 2016, but it shows their progression into what can be considered their first phase of redevelopment on the site. And again, on the far right, 2018, both of those photos are from, I believe, the same weekend. I don't think they're the same day, but hosting events, able to have things that are indoors and spill outdoors and vice versa. And a ribbon cutting just to symbolize the achievement that they've done there. And again, the purpose of the space is a visitor center, but again, it has become a great place for them to host events. It has given much more, I guess, flexibility and expanded the offerings for Drayton Hall. So I'll move from there as we start to transition into our recommendations. I think you can start to see what we've been talking about over the past few months coming to life. But we have, again, just emphasizing, for simplicity, we've broken those into three categories. The first one being operations, and I'll touch on that one, and then I'll hand it over to Carolyn to talk about the program offerings, and we'll continue to move through those. So
Edward, thank you. You're a hard act to follow. I mean, you've stolen.
You've coached me well, Carolyn. You've coached me well. There we go.
Yeah, usually I'm the one who talks so much. I think the most important thing that I hear in going back over everything we've been talking about for the last year is that we develop the whole property and the whole history and the whole community of Spring Hill. And that's something that we don't want just the mansion to bear the whole story of just the rugs and the property. And we want to talk about all the families that have lived there over the course of 100 years. We want to talk about the entire agricultural history over 100 years, and also over the course of a year. So I think the course of a year will start to dictate the sorts of programs and activities that go on the property, and we fall into a more organic system. And then we literally start to talk about the people and the arts and the times that are there. And I think if we start to do that, we start to involve the community. Something else Edward talked about, with activating partnerships. You've got a university who's a neighbor there. And you've got great corporate partners there. And so I think the history is what the history is, but now we begin to include everybody in it. I think it's particularly interesting that Edward mentioned, Evergreen and the Ancestor Project, and that's a big pet favorite of mine, is to get the community involved, in the historical society, for people who were a part of Rippavilla over time, or whose families were parts of it, that they begin to come and document their time and space. Everybody kind of knows what the history was, but I think that we take it out of the mansion and we expand it over the whole acreage that we have, and we let the community come in and be part of it. And we make big use of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and for local universities to help tell this story. History can get pretty boring and dry, but I think that if we take it out over, like I say, the entire acreage, and we look at it in a holistic way over the entire year, so that we talk about not only the families and the owners, but we talk about the agricultural and farming history. Civil War certainly falls in there. And then we look at the lost souls and the cemeteries that are there. We wrap our arms around a huge slice of history and culture there. So I just want to say that I want Ripavilla to be more than just a tour through a beautiful, magnificent house, but I want it to be an exploration of an entire community, an entire slice of time. So I don't want to go into a whole lot more about that, but I think the big message here is entirety. We look at every day of the week. We explore the entire week. We explore the entire acreage, and we begin to invite the entire community to come in and be part of this. And with that, I yield the floor.
And Carolyn, I think you got so excited you skipped Ed's actual documentation of his recommendations. Let's go back. I know we've got a lot of information we're putting out there tonight, but if you can just kind of zip through those real quick, because we kind of skipped the slide.
No, absolutely. And I know I have been talking a lot, so it might have been you tapped me on the shoulder and say, hurry it up.
He wants to have a drink tonight.
But no, really briefly, but not lacking importance. Really looking at operations, and I think when you talk about operations, it all starts from the top, right? So clear and strong leadership, and pairing that leadership with the clear identity and a vision is what we found is very, very, very important as organizations work to both sustain themselves or turn the tide to more prominence. And I think utilizing committees to support key individuals is a way to go. No one's an expert at everything, and oftentimes when people try to be that, they fall short, and they fall short horribly. And so when you're thinking about something that is entrusted to a key individual, provide them with the support that they need. Number two, assess hours of operation. It's just creating greater access. I think it probably is appropriate to come back behind Carolyn after this, because we talked about wanting to reach out into the community, right? And so one of the things that I found is if you're not open on Sundays, you cut a lot of people out. If you're not open in the evenings, you eliminate a lot of people. If you're not willing to be open during certain times of the day, you make it hard for corporate events and folks that will want to use the facility and can help create some very creative ways to generate revenue. It's just kind of the doors closed on them from the beginning. The other thing I'll emphasize again with forming the committees, but I think taking a look at those comparable institutions that we showed. I mean, find peers, right? So find goals, metrics, and find peers. The reason I really enjoyed reaching outside of Middle Tennessee and Tennessee is because those folks won't be your competitors. So you can build relationships with them, ask about their programs, seek to emulate them, lessons learned in ways that they may have struggled in the forefront, so that you can avoid those, and things that are really successful that you can emulate. And then I think, again, the number 5 and number 6. Number 5, seek those easy wins. Current resources to show commitment essentially means, the city is involved, the city is there. Let's utilize all of the city's resources that they have to really push Ripavilla to that next level and prepare it for whoever may come in after to succeed. And positive press. I mean, we've talked about the engagement that we've done even in a difficult year. But those things should be played, this particular presentation, over and over again. Make it known that Ripavilla is open for business and wants to be greater and better than it has been in the past, and that you're looking for those creative and innovative things that you can do to take you into the future. And then lastly, diversify those funding sources. Grants were absent in the financials that I saw. Any grant that was of significance, that needs to change. And again, donations, finding ways to marry those things together. Grants are a great way to solicit funds, to close the gap, or to really push and make those more impactful. And that's done with stronger and newer partnerships. And again, as Carolyn said, community partners, really leaning in to find partners in those that will help you along the way, and find some joint benefits of success. Turn it over now.
Let's go. Let's clip over to recommendation number 3. This is the one, you guys, the last several meetings, we focused a lot in the town halls, in the drawings you've seen, on what we recommend happening on the actual site and with some of the existing resources and buildings. And we got information that Josh talked about at the beginning. We gathered information. We've been working with Ed and his team to say, here's what we heard. And Ed can tell us that, hey, those things have been successful elsewhere, and kind of combining those two things together to say, these are our team's recommendations. And with that, then once we decided what those recommendations were, we said, okay, what does all this cost? Because I know the objective here is that Ripavilla become more self-sustaining. So it's hard to talk about cost and spending money when you're really trying to say, gosh, we don't want to spend a ton of money. But I think what we're looking at is, what are the smart things that you do and the capital improvements that you make that allow you to bring in more revenue without greatly increasing your expenses. So basically, we have we've heard from the very beginning, preservation is first and foremost. Don't mess up the assets you have. Protect those things, make the most of the story and the assets in this beautiful almost 100-acre property. But look for those areas that we can strategically improve and generate revenue from them, bring in more revenue, whether it's through operations thing like the day of the week, or creating structures that can allow you to have events and more educational things to bring people to the site. And then really that connectivity. Carolyn talked about using the entire site, and that's connecting to the Ripavilla Greenway and different things for people to come to Ripavilla for different reasons other than to just learn history. History is important and great, but for all people, sometimes that's not the draw. They just want a beautiful place to go, to wander around and spend a nice afternoon. So a lot of those objectives are what we looked at for these capital projects. So you'll see 4 projects down at the bottom, which I'm going to get into a little more detail, try to go through fairly quickly. The recommendations we have are in the range of 5.6 to 6.7 million for the pieces and parts that we have in there. Josh, roll to the next one. First and foremost on here was looking at those assets that you have already on the property. The good news is Phil Thomason, who's on our call here, he's gone out and looked at the property and the buildings on the site. And a lot of them are in really good shape. Ripavilla has made some, the mansion has had some issues with plaster and leaks. Those have been repaired. And so when you really look at those first couple items, those most historic kind of buildings on the site, they really don't, there's not a lot of money that really needs to go into them to repair some stuff. But first and foremost, we want to focus on those things. and then look at some of these other buildings on the campus that can be, some money can be put into them to create a greater use, a different use. So again, we're activating the site and you're using your resources. If you go down to the bottom, number 8 on there is the brown stand replica. It's not a historic structure. It can add some value to it. It probably needs some work, but I think those are that's something you could look to a community partner to do. So we're putting the cost on the table and not necessarily saying that all this money has to come from the city or whoever the operator is, but here's an order of magnitude of some things that could really make an impact on Ripavilla's property. So if you look at that, that's, you know, if you take the cost, we're about $340,000 if you do all of these things. Start at the top and do those things to just restore things, you have a smaller, smaller amount. So we're kind of lumping these into categories. And for now, we're recommending just to kind of, as you get another operator in here and they're really looking at the property, that maybe you budget $15,000 to $20,000 a year for repairs, people to come out to make sure that, you know, that you're assessing things and not deferring maintenance, that you're on top of it. And then over time, that actually should be able to come down as things are more stable and you have a more constant, I guess, maintenance plan and confidence in revenue stream to keep that going. Next category is the site activation and connectivity. The first 2 items, these are, again, Carolyn looking at story and potential, kind of got the site divided into 3 zones of storytelling that were on her slide and a lot of the documentation we talked about in the past. The adding signage and other opportunities, you're walking through the site with this live beacon system as you walk through and maybe connecting to an app that can tell you, some of the history of the site. Carolyn could probably talk for an hour about that, but we're not going to do that tonight. Item 3 is working with the Ripavilla Greenway and looking at the trails that are on already, just the places you can walk on the site, creating ADA paths and, for more accessibility. And we've worked with the land trust on that as far as getting approval to do that, because they have a whole series of kind of restrictions and guidelines for impacting the property. And then just some other things that are considered on the site that really start to connect the site and activate the site. And one thing we didn't even put any dollars to, but we just think is fascinating, at the back of the site, there used to be a ton of agriculture buildings. PD Houston, a lot of the structures that were around at that time, some old maps that I think Carolyn's interpretive live beacon app system could kind of direct you to what used to be back there to really tell the story of agriculture. There's a lot of other things I think that you can do. But we just said that's a great opportunity, but probably low on the priority list, or a great opportunity for a grant. So all of these things, that could be potentially $1 million worth of improvements. Next slide. Beautification. Edward talked a lot about this at Cheekwood, other places. This is not just for the people that are interested in history, but also the people that just want a pretty place to go out and take pictures for your, have a wedding, things that draw people in, that just because it's a beautiful place. And Ripavilla is beautiful now. I think the recommendations on here are just ways to make it even better and focus on it as something, and knowing that it is something that in other locations has really drawn people in and has been one of those things that can increase visitorship and hopefully then the the revenue that comes with it. Again, that's around $1 million worth of potential improvements. Next slide. And this is probably our biggest recommendation, and why Ed also talked a lot about Drayton Hall. One of the biggest things that from an education standpoint, event standpoint, is we believe it's really important to have what we're calling it an interpretive center. You can call it a welcome center, interpretive center, event center, but a space similar to Drayton Hall where you can have events, you can welcome people, it can serve many purposes, but it is not taking up and potentially harming your historic structures like the mansion. It lets the mansion be on the tour circuit and retain its historic integrity. And then you have another space that is okay to spill red wine in the event center, and it's okay for people to sit on the furniture. And so creating this thing that really can help to activate the site. The diagram that you see in the bottom right-hand corner, this is, and we can pull to the bigger site plan at the end, but I think you guys know where the stock barn is, right behind the mansion with the kind of medallion on it. That right now is used for just storage of agriculture equipment. It's just kind of a shed that's, a utility type shed. The idea here is that we repurpose that stock barn into we keep calling it kind of a permanent tent. It's a outdoor structure, or maybe I keep calling that outdoor structure that keeps the water off you. It's a shelter outside that you could gather a school group in. It opens up potentially to this new courtyard, and then a new interpretive center behind it that has an event space, kitchen, restrooms, exhibits, classroom, and you could move that food component that we talked about being important. You can have someplace you can get snacks or a drink. The gift shop could move here. And so there's a lot of potential of creating this thing right here that really can activate the site. It's close to the amphitheater. It's close to the parking, and a place where we've identified additional parking. The Freedman School right there, which gets a lot of attention when people come out to the site. And there's room for this thing to morph and grow. If you find a donor that, the great donor opportunity too at this location for the courtyard and the event center and the classroom, those are things that vision that Edward talked about, having the vision and the pretty pictures to go talk to people about giving to Rippavilla in a different way other than memberships and small donations. This is about making an impact that can really give Rippavilla a lot of opportunity to do a lot of things, I think, that are important and help other institutions be successful. So you'll see another slew of items on here. A lot of that, there's about $300,000 that Carolyn's budgeted for some interpretive, touch screens and exhibits and things that really can help expand the story. The community's talked a lot about wanting to connect to other areas in Spring Hill. And I think having a place where you can have digital content and a classroom, you continue to build on that story as it's developed. And so we think the location of this is a new event center, interpretive center by the stock barn near the amphitheater is the preferred location for this. But you can see the first item under at the top. Another option is to use the Eichert Center. If this money doesn't come along, you want to do something sooner while you're trying to get the revenue to afford this. The Eichert Center, I think it needs to be cleaned up to look more contextual with the campus, really work on beautifying the building, but then also working on the interior to provide some of these same spaces for classroom and exhibits in those more interpretive moments. So this is your biggest price tag on here. This can range from, what I have, 3.3 to 4.4 million, depending on what you do, how big your building is, how much you want to put into it. But I think it can have one of the biggest impacts on your revenue generating events for the space. So that's sort of the cost stuff, and whatever I said, it was 6 to 7-ish million at the beginning, trying to just give an idea of what these recommendations that have been discussed, kind of what ballpark we're in. And really, I think, Josh, you want to flip to the next one? In conclusion for tonight, and then we'll open this up for questions, is we really want this master plan to serve as the framework for prioritizing what we heard from the community, what we've heard from operators, from people who love Rippavilla and are really passionate about it, and so serve as that framework to help people evaluate and make decisions. And then looking at those programming opportunities and connecting them to the what are your sources of funding? Where, some of these things you may be able to get grants for and do very quickly, and other things may take a little longer to implement. And we mentioned that I think it's important that there is is leadership and a champion for Rippavilla from the city's standpoint of really making sure that Rippavilla wants to succeed. Y'all are looking for a new operator for the site, and we're hoping that this master plan and these discussions we've had with so many people in the community will help inform the decision for who operates this in the future, and that they use this as a guide to determine the things that the city want, that people in Spring Hill and our team feel are important for success of this, this property. And then I think going back and revisiting the master plan, we pulled this master plan together with our kind of benchmarking with other institutions, but also with what we heard from the team. And over time that changes. And a master plan is sort of a living document. And, as opportunities come along and you get some huge donor, we can figure out, how to spend that money and make it work the best for Rippavilla, to really have you be in a position to be successful, ongoing, and share this story with many more people than you already do. So with that, I know we took a while here. Can we open it up for questions on here? Anybody have questions or?
Yeah, I'd say I can give those who'd like to speak permission to talk. If you just want to click the raise your hand button, you're also welcome to type into the chat.
Josh, there was a question that was posed by Mr. Canapari, who's attending our meeting this evening. One of the pie charts that Ed was covering early in the presentation, there was one particular slice that wasn't labeled, and he was curious what that slice represented. That was in the chat comments.
Our text was there this afternoon. The word contributions, it must have turned to white text. It's gone, but that was the contribution portion.
Thank you.
Sure. No other questions? Okay. Well, if nobody has any other questions or comments, we, feel free to reach out afterwards. I think this will be posted on the city's website after this. And we're in the process of taking these sort of final recommendations and incorporating it into our final master plan booklet, which we're hoping to present to BOMA beginning, or the work session beginning of April, and get this to vote sometime in April to wrap this portion of it up. So
Like we do have one. So the name on here is Sprin.
It's Hazel Nieves.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know how that happened, but I'll go by that too. I'm sorry, I ended up joining the meeting late, and I really hate that. I guess my question is how soon will these slides and this presentation be available on the city website, please?
I think immediately. I mean, like tomorrow or tonight. We send it on to Lori already.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then I'll be immediately following up also with the recording. So that maybe tomorrow should be added as well.
I'm posting the slides as we speak.
Great.
Excellent.
Any other questions? I think I've made it so everybody can unmute themselves if they prefer to talk. So if you have a question, now is the time.
We're losing focus in my background over here. My daughter rides through on her bike.
Well, I think
if
that was a very comprehensive, complete presentation. Alderman Worth, or
yeah, I'm sorry. I do have one question. When are you all going to come before the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and present this exact, or is this the presentation opportunity?
No, we will be. What is the date, Josh? I don't have it in front of me that we're targeting right now.
I think it was the April work session.
Okay.
And so, so we're taking this, there's a more comprehensive document that, you know, there's a lot more information in there, but this is the basis of the recommendations that will be in there. And so I think our plan is to try to get that wrapped up into you guys before the work session. So you have a chance to review it before we have the work session. We haven't finalized that, but that's our plan right now.
Great, I appreciate that.
Thanks. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, we do, since this is our last town hall, we do want to thank everybody who has helped us learn more about Ripavilla and give us input. You know, I really didn't know much about Ripavilla. I'd heard the name, but I hadn't been there before. And I just, I love the place. I mean, I just think it's a great asset, not just for Spring Hill, but for the whole region. So we're really, you know, we're excited about the future for Rippavilla, and we thank you for letting us be part of this process.
And I'll reiterate as well, you know, Josh, Mary, Paige, the whole Tuck-Hinton team and all the folks that tonight have been an integral part of the whole process that's led to this point. I'll take a second to thank everybody, you know, not only the participants and the attendees tonight, but just the whole process. I think it's gone really well. We've had some obvious challenges with COVID and other things in terms of trying to keep the momentum on the planning effort going. But we're very close now to finishing, but I want to take a second. I'll be leaving the city effective tomorrow, so this will be my last public meeting and last chance to really thank the team and the community for all the work and all the input that they've provided. I think we've got a great master plan. I think it's a great roadmap for future success for the property. And it certainly gives everybody a real clear plan for how we can invest in such a wonderful asset to the community moving forward. And I just want to take a second to thank everybody for a great process that's led us to this point. And I look forward to seeing the final product as you guys move forward to find the next month and a half. But thank you again.
Thanks, Chuck. Best of luck. And with that, if there's nothing else, I guess we'll call it a night.
And everybody,
Thank you.
thanks
Thanks.
for your time.
Thank you.